Dad, tell me about Mom's first flight to Boston.
Well, your mother arrived in Boston in June of 1976. She had been, of course, she's originally from Pittsburgh, and we met at Duquesne in Pittsburgh. And she had been to Boston previously, but uh, not flying in. And so we flew. She flew into Logan, and I picked her up, and we were heading out the access road, heading out of Logan towards the Callahan Tunnel, and there was a sign. This is before the digital age, and it would be the sign, "Welcome to Boston, Logan International Airport." And they would have various things up there. Sometimes they would say, "Welcome to Logan, world's eighth busiest airport," or depending on what was happening at that point. But anyway, the sign said, "Welcome to Boston, home of the 1976 NBA World Champion Boston Celtics." So there was a great sign to see, and it was a big win for them that season. Without a struggle, with a struggle, I should say, and but that was Mom's introduction to Logan International Airport, seeing that big sign honoring the champion Celtics.
Quackity quack, we are backity back. The third installment of Duck and Rock Sports presents the Celtics Chronicles. I'm Matt McDonough, accompanied by my father, Jim McDonough. We will pick up where we left off in the mid-1970s. The Celtics have just beaten the Bucks in the 1974 NBA Finals, and the 1974-75 season, a 60-22 record for the Celtics, did not end in a repeat. Dad, what do you remember about that season?
Well, obviously, we were very happy with the results of 1974. And unfortunately, heading into the 74-75 season, Dave Cowens, obviously their all-star center and MVP from the 73 season, 72-73 season, got hurt in the preseason. He broke his hand, and he missed, as I recall, I believe the first 17 games of that season. It was in the teens anyway, and I think they went like 9-8. Coming off a season where they had won like 50, 55, 56 games. So it was a rough Celtic start, but Cowens came back and they hit their stride, and the rest of the season they played extremely well. They played as well as they had in the previous championship season, and they ended up winning 60 games. To do that, obviously, they had to finish extremely strong, winning 50 out of their, I believe they were like 51 and 14 down the stretch after Cowens came back, and somehow they, by doing that, on I believe it was the last day of the regular season, they secured home court advantage by tying the Bullets that year, the Washington Bullets, with the same record, 60-22, but the Celtics, via the tiebreaker, had home court. But what ended up happening in the playoffs, when the Celtics did match up with the Bullets in the conference final, after all of that struggle to catch up to the Bullets and gain that home court advantage, they lost the first game at home, and there went the home court advantage, and they ended up losing to the Bullets in 6 games, and that was a Bullet team that really had Wes Unseld and Elvin Hayes, were Phil Chenier, some really big stars. But the two players that really hurt the Celtics then were two very young players, a guard named Kevin Porter and a swingman forward who could really shoot, Nick Witherspoon, and they really killed the Celtics in that series. And the Celtics went down in 6, which was very disappointing. and because everybody felt whoever won that series would win the championship, because the Golden State Warriors, the upstart Golden State Warriors, kind of came out of nowhere and won the West, and were not expected to be a real rival for either the Celtics or the Bullets. But the Warriors behind Rick Barry, who, with a bunch of really no-name players along with him. Phil Smith was there, but there were a lot of players that were just coming into their own, and they ended up beating the Bullets, I believe, in 4 straight.
And Al Attles was a coach, right?
Al Attles was a coach, and believe it or not, the coach back then for the Bullets was Casey Jones, but that was 75, and that was obviously disappointing, because they had really worked hard to overcome Cowan's injury early in the season, and it just didn't work out in the playoffs.
And we'll get to kind of the merger, but the first round was against Houston.
It was against Houston, yeah. Yeah, I believe it was against Houston. Houston had a good team, but they, it was just the Bullets were the competition, and that was a team that they just primarily because of the play of Witherspoon and Kevin Porter, that the Celtics just couldn't overcome that Bullet team that season in 1975.
And Unseld as a player, obviously, because he was Rookie of the Year and MVP, right? And
yeah, that was 1968-69 season, Bill Russell's last season. He came in, and he wasn't the more heralded. Back then, he came in, he was the second pick in the draft. The first pick was Elvin Hayes, and they were both on that team. Unseld played his entire career with the Bullets, but Hayes, they ended up, he started with the Rockets, but then he moved on to the Bullets at that point. So the Bullets had a very good team, and they ended up winning a championship when they played Seattle back-to-back in the late 70s, and they split that. Seattle won one year, and the Bullets won the other year. So they did have a good team, the Bullets. They were one of the better teams in the Eastern Conference at that point.
And it is interesting looking at the East, the Atlantic Division, which the Celtics won, and the Celtics, as you said, being tied for the top seed with the Washington Bullets. The Atlantic Division, Celtics, Knicks, and Sixers, 2 foes we're used to. The Buffalo Braves, who we'll get to in terms of a late 70s movement or lack thereof. And then the Eastern Conference, as we said, the Houston Rockets were in the East, and then the New Orleans Jazz were rounded out the 9-team Eastern Conference. So a lot of shuffling in the 70s, so to speak. But moving on to the big year, as we previewed, with not just Mom's big visit to Boston, but the Celtics reclaiming the title. What stands out to you about the 1975 76 season, and even especially in terms of the roster? Don Chaney, who played with both Bill Russell and Larry Bird, the only Celtic to do so, but Chaney, who had won in 1969 with the Celtics and 1974, left for the ABA and the Spirits of St. Louis. But there was also a big trade before the season with Paul Westphal and Charlie Scott.
Right. The Celtics had, believe it or not, the way the Celtics got Paul Silas in part was due to the fact that, back then, NBA teams, even though if they knew an ABA team had the lead on a big college star and maybe already had signed him, the NBA would still draft, an NBA team would still draft the ABA player just to have his rights in case that ever came up, or if there were a merger or if the ABA disbanded. And that's how the Celtics actually had Scott's rights, even though he never played for them. He went directly to the ABA. But then when he came into the NBA, Phoenix, the Celtics made a trade and got Paul Silas, who they badly needed. They needed some help for because the Knicks were their big rival back in the 72, 73, 73, 74 season. And they really didn't have an answer for Dave DeBusschere, who really was a power forward. Today he'd be a shooting forward at best, but at 6'6", 6'7", he did a good job on the boards and had a nice outside shot. But Silas could really handle the boards. But anyway, what it comes down to as far as that season goes is the fact that they did make a trade with Phoenix before the season, sending Paul Westphal, who had not started for them, but had played well, very well in the 1974 playoffs to help lead them to the championship coming off the bench to Phoenix. And they got Charlie Scott, which... on paper, I guess, Westphal was a big collar star like Charlie Scott, too, but maybe not quite to the degree as an All-American like Scott. So it was a bit perplexing, but they did, many think, in spite of the trade, they did end up winning the championship. And it was a struggle during those playoffs. The players were, I think, I think Heinsohn was getting on the players' nerves, and because Heinsohn was what do you call a hands-on coach and was very demonstrative on the sideline, and I think it was starting to get to the veteran Celtics his antics on the sideline, and eventually it cost him his job, Heinsohn. But they did prevail that season, and it was not one of their great championships by any means. They ended up beating. Phoenix, I believe they were 42-40 or 40-42. They were barely a 500 team, and they beat them in the finals. And then Kansas City, Omaha upset the Warriors, who were expected to be back looking for a repeat championship, but they never made it to the final that particular year.
Yeah, and the Celtics, They did go 54-28. The Suns, as you said, went 42-40. The Celtics won the Atlantic, top seed in the East by 5 games. And then they did, as you said, face Phoenix in what isn't really the series itself isn't really talked about. But one game particularly is more so than others. So the Celtics, we have them in the first round, the conference semifinals, they win 4-2 over the Buffalo Braves. And then in the conference finals, they win 4-2 over Cleveland. So can you talk about that Phoenix series and just kind of what you remember from it?
Well, the big game actually was the Game 5, where it went into triple overtime, and Glenn McDonough came off the benches. There was a game of attrition, and players either fouled out or had played an inordinate amount of minutes. And McDonough, the former number 1 pick, who never really had done much, only in his second or third season at that point, and really didn't do much really after that, came up with some big shots in the overtime sessions and helped lead the Celtics to victory. And I can recall I was working back then when I got back from Pittsburgh. We used to get out relatively early compared to the New England schools at Duquesne, and I had access to tickets, and I had gone to a couple of games. I had my buddy. We secured tickets, but I was working the night shift that particular night at the factory I worked at, and I was about to take time off when I had college to pay for. So, but I was able to follow the game on TV in the factory, and was happy they won, but I was, in another way, I was happy they won, but I thought they were such a superior team to Phoenix that I was almost angry that it had to be that close. And because Phoenix really didn't really belong in the same court with them. But anyway, they did win that game and went on to win the series. And everybody kind of breathed a sigh of relief.
And that's the series where home court held the first 4 games, so the game 5 was pivotal, and it is remembered as one of the best NBA Finals games of all time. That game 5, as you said, it did go into triple overtime. The Celtics led 109-106 with about 19 seconds left. The Suns score 4 points in about 10 seconds.
Yeah.
Westfall, against his old team, steals the inbounds after a made basket. So the Celtics, it's now, they're down 1 and they inbounded at half court with 5 seconds left. And Havlicek gets the inbound pass half court. Does kind of a drive where it's very controlled and methodical, a runner, but a very controlled runner. He bangs in with about 2 seconds left. And then it was complete pandemonium because the time ran out, where you had the Celtics celebrating, running through center court into the tunnel and toward the locker room. The fans stormed the court. The ref, Richie Powers, is in a headlock and punching a fan who's punching him. So I think the fan started it, but Richie Powers is getting assaulted. The referee on the court. When Havlicek's shot went in, he immediately said there was a second or 2 left. So unlike the Patriots-Rams Super Bowl of 2002, where they kind of let 2 seconds tick off the clock following Adam Vinatieri's kick, they did put a second back on the clock. But what was kind of your recollection of that wild moment in the second overtime, where you have Havlicek seemingly win the game, the crowd storming the court, and Richie Powers in a fight with a fan?
Yeah, it was crazy. It was crazy. And then I believe they threw the ball into Guy Hurd.
Mm-hmm. Yes, Garfield Hurd,
who had actually previously played for the Buffalo Braves. And he hit a crazy shot.
Yeah.
And I believe a timeout was called. They didn't have a timeout. And so there was a free throw, and the Celtics were able to secure a tie and go on to the third overtime, where I think McDonough came up with some more heroics then, and they were able to win in the 3 overtimes. But like I say, it was kind of it was crazy how things had changed in the 2 years. 1974, there was a huge sense of celebration when they beat Milwaukee, because Milwaukee had won a championship, just 2 years previous to that. Actually, 3 years previous. They won in 1971, and they had, with Jabbar and Oscar Robertson and Bobby Dandridge, they were considered a really tough team. And for the Celtics to win that, not having home court advantage, was a great accomplishment. But 2 years later, it was just it was Heinsohn had really kind of almost lost it. He was kind of, in terms of his histrionics on the sideline, and the players had gotten tired of them, and it really they were just relieved, I believe, to win the championship. And it carried over to the fall to the next season, because I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but the next season proved to be very, very telling.
Yeah, and as you said, Garfield Hurd with the shot heard around the world, a contested turnaround jumper off the inbounds pass that was from midcourt, thanks to the Phoenix Suns using a timeout they didn't have. JoJo White hit the technical free throw, giving the Celtics a 2-point lead with no 3-point shot back then. Hurd's jumper to the right top of the key goes in at the buzzer in kind of a Tate George-like fashion of 1 second, and it's literally split seconds between that shot counting and sending it to a third overtime and the shot not counting. But in the third overtime, as you said, the Celtics did get a lead. Westfall did tie it off a full court pass where he laid it in with 13 seconds left to cut the deficit to 2. And the Suns were pressing in the backcourt and at half court, but the Celtics got it over. And the Suns kind of exhausted. The Celtics played keep away, and then JoJo White dribbled out the clock and then threw up a shot off the backboard as the crowd stormed the court for real this time. When watching the end of Game 6, as you said, the Celtics went 87-80, but it was a very muted kind of celebration at the end. Where I know it was like that on the road back then, but the 4-2 series win, it did seem a little bit more reserved from the Celtics. And you talked about, before we get into a couple of the players, since this will kind of wrap up their Celtic contributions in a way, but you as you said with Tommy Heinsohn, him as a coach sort of became a little tiresome to the team, at least. He's in the Hall of Fame as a player, coach, and broadcaster, similar to Bill Russell getting in right before his death as a coach, also a 2-time champion coach. So, what do you remember in addition to the sideline antics of Tommy Heinsohn, the coach, not the player or broadcaster?
Well, I thought Heinsohn was great when they brought him in, after Russell retired as a player coach, and he was very enthusiastic, very knowledgeable. You could tell when he broadcast, he really knew the game, and he was very offensive oriented. He never met a shot he wouldn't take in his career, and he was great for a young team, and the team responded well in the early '70s. They drafted Cowens, and they had good holdovers. They drafted JoJo White. They had Havlicek, obviously coming as a holdover from the Russell years, and they built a championship team rather quickly. 5 years after Russell retired, they won the championship, and they were extremely competitive in the previous season with a team record 68 wins. So it's just one of those things where I believe the same thing actually happened with Bill Fitch with the Celtics. Sometimes you've got these fiery, hands-on coaches, and you don't really see them as much today because it's more of a players' league today with the amount of money they're making. But back then, a guy like Heinsohn he was kind of a legendary figure, considering what he had done as a player and helping lead the Celtics to all those championships. But he just by that time, by the mid '70s, things, the tide had turned. They won the championship, which was great. But the players had it certainly, I think, his act had grown old for particularly for the veteran players.
And before getting into the next season, as we talked last podcast, or the imaginary sort of line of demarcation of 1970, conveniently and coincidentally, after Bill Russell retired, becomes sort of the modern NBA. Another line of demarcation talked about in the annals of NBA history is the 1976 merger, where, as we alluded to, it was only 4 teams, similar to when the NHL took on the WHL, which gave the Whalers, or WHA, gave the Whalers NHL status. But compared to other mergers across the leagues, where 1967 the NHL doubled from 6 to 12 teams, yet you don't really have those pre-1967 championships talked about in the manner in which the NBA championships are talked about when the NHL doubled from 6 to 12 teams, and then the infancy of the Super Bowl era when you have the AFL NFL merger in 1970, officially combining the two leagues. You had 16 NFL teams, and then you had 10 franchises from the AHL formed the AFC and NFC. A couple of NFL teams moved to the AFC, but the league also, again, close to doubling with a promise of more franchises on the horizon. So getting back to the NBA piece of it, was there a big, how big was the ABA NBA merger? Obviously, the Denver Nuggets, Indiana Pacers, New York Nets, San Antonio Spurs joined the NBA in June of 1976. And then the next season, you have the New York Nets and San Antonio Spurs in a now 11-team East. But did it change the basketball quality that much? Did it make the league more relevant? Or, I mean, kind of, it's talked about in historical terms as some sort of big moment in NBA history. Did you see it that way?
No, I didn't see it as a momentous change. You did acquire, or did have, you got Dr. J in the NBA. I mean, that was probably the biggest thing that came out of it. Having Irving playing in the NBA rather than the rival ABA, and he had other big stars too. That Moses Malone, and you had actually the teams that came in were competitive. George Gervin, for instance. I remember Gervin's, one of his quotes was in the 76-77 season, was later on in the season, he said, I know these NBA teams and these NBA players, they don't scare me. He says, although I do worry about that Dave Cowens, hitting me over the head, but it really, there was not a huge dynamic because you didn't really incorporate. You only incorporated 4 new teams, and then the rest of the players went into a dispersal. Most of them went to teams that already had their rights, due to some smart planning by, like I had said earlier, some NBA teams would, even though they knew they had no opportunity to get a guy out of the ABA to the NBA, they would use a lower draft pick to secure his rights in case something like this were to eventually occur, which it did, and that's the reason why you did end up having various players end up at various locations.
And as you said, various players at various locations. The 1976-77 season, JoJo White, Dave Cowens, John Havlicek, all still on the team. But the Celtics, they finished in second place in the division, 44-38, 6 games behind Philadelphia. 4th place in the Eastern Conference. So as the 4 seed, they played in the newly minted first round, and they christened it by beating San Antonio 2-0, and then they lose in the Eastern Conference semifinals in Game 7 on the road to Philadelphia. Was this the end of that Celtic run, to put it lightly?
Yeah, well, what ended up happening too, and during that season, Cowens took his famous sabbatical, and this is part of the, I think the issue between the veteran players and Heinsohn, and they had just, like I said, grown tired of his overcoaching, his antics, and he decided he just wasn't going to play. He was going to take a leave of absence from the game, and he literally drove a cab around the city of Boston. And he missed, again, he missed a similar amount of games to 2 years previous when he was injured. But this time he missed just because he just didn't, his head wasn't in the game, and he just didn't want to play. And Eventually, he got it together and he did come back. 2 months into the season, but that's one of the reasons they finished with only 44 wins because they had to play, a couple of months without Cowens, and it took them a while to get going with him back on the team. But effectively, that was their last, really competitive playoff run where they took the Sixers to 7 games, and that season Philadelphia actually made it to the finals. They ended up playing Portland that year with Bill Walton, and Portland actually upset them. Because Portland was kind of coming into their own themselves. Portland actually had a much better season the following year in terms of their regular season, and but then that year Walton got hurt, and so Portland couldn't repeat. But so that was kind of the beginning of the end for that particular team.
And yeah, I mean, even Paul Silas, who didn't make it to that year following the title, he was traded to Denver. The Nuggets got him. Red Auerbach sent him there after sort of a disagreement over salary, and then Silas ends up obviously becoming a great coach, but also winning it with the Seattle Supersonics later in the decade. So even they kind of didn't have the full gang back together.
No, and the thing about Silas, and people criticized Auerbach. Some people might think of Auerbach as, how can you criticize Red Auerbach? And he was a legendary character. And one of the great things about Red Auerbach, and I can go back to my earliest days going to games. He had his own seat right in the loge section, right at midcourt. And if you got in there, half hour before the game, and I always did, and particularly first my father would take me, and then later on when we would take the subway in on our own, he would be sitting in his seat, and you could walk right up to him, and he'd write your program, and you'd ask him for the autograph, and he would always sign. He was just he was good that way, and like I said, he sat right in the crowd. He had a seat right in the middle of the crowd there, and you don't see too much of that. Of course, that was before luxury boxes and whatnot. But but Auerbach with Silas, for some reason, he didn't want to pay Silas, and he seemed to revere. He wanted Sidney Wicks and Curtis Rowe, who they were great. Both of them were great team players, particularly Sidney Wicks out in UCLA. When they were in college, I thought Sidney Wicks was, playing against Otis Gilmore at 6'9" in the NCAA championship in March Madness. He was a tremendous college player, but when he got to Portland in the NBA, Wicks he became an entirely different player. He'd rather score than play D, and he was undersized anyway to play in the NBA at 6'9" and playing big men, but. They got them, and they really weren't the type of player that Silas was, and that alienated Cowens also, which helped lead to his sabbatical that year. And they just were not the same team. And again, that and eventually, Heinsohn went, and believe it or not, Dave Cowens was actually player coach for a while. It was kind of crazy how things just kind of fell apart within about a 2-year period. But I guess to be expected in a way, because they were at key positions, aging, and it was to be expected.
Yeah, and you and moving to the next season, as you said, you had Tom Heinsohn. Head coach Tom Satch Sanders, Hall of Fame contributor from the Russell era Celtics, one of the few remaining living Celtic legends from the Russell dynasty. Coached the team for a little bit, but they did finish that next 77-78 season 32-50, missing the playoffs, finishing 8th in an 11-team Eastern Conference. They did have Cedric Maxwell on the team, who was drafted from Charlotte that season on the 12th pick, as well as Don Chaney back. But Cowens, as you said, with the sabbatical, Havlicek and White all remained on the roster for that 77-78 team. But when you move forward to the next season, where they did get Nate Archibald, Nate Tiny Archibald on the roster. Tom Satch Sanders was fired as coach with Dave Cowens coaching the team as player coach, Casey Jones as an assistant. But the team did look completely different, where Havlicek had retired, and JoJo White was now playing with the Golden State Warriors before finishing his career with the Kansas City Kings. So can you kind of just sum up Havlicek's end of his career, as well as talking about JoJo White's contributions to the Celtics Hall of Famer, as well as the 1976 Finals MVP?
Well, Havlicek, Havlicek could have, because he could have played forever. You've got, LeBron playing into his 40s. Havlicek could have. He had the stamina, and he was still an effective player. But the team, the team was so bad that it was the reason that Havlicek did not decide to. If you look at it, if he had played 2 more years, he would have played with Larry Bird. So there was just one season in between Havlicek's retirement and the Celtics getting Larry Bird. But Havlicek, Havlicek he'll go down as the 3rd greatest Celtic of all time for his contributions to to all of the championship teams within 2 eras. Really, he spans 2 eras, and JoJo was an outstanding player. He was drafted out of Kansas. He's a first-team All-American. Nobody knew he was really considered a defensive player in college, but he really had a nice shot. He developed into one of their all-time great guards, and again, like you said, he was the MVP of the '76 finals, and truly one of the top 10 to 12 Celtics of all time. JoJo was.
And going back to Havlicek, like you said, for his final season, he played all 82 games, 34 minutes a game, and then averages 16 points a game. And then
in his final game, which was on national TV, he in the 4th quarter he went nuts. I think he scored like 18 points. He took a lot of shots. He just went out. He wasn't gunning as much as he just was driving to the hoop. He just wanted to, show the fans how he appreciated them and how they loved him. And he kind of bowed. He went up and down the court to either end and bowed to the fans. And Havlicek was truly one of the all-time Celtic greats. Like I say, the 3rd greatest Celtic of all time, and of course one of the most popular, easily one of the most popular Celtics of all time.
And yeah, I remember even at his death, not only did you say you thought he'd play forever, you think a guy like him would live forever.
Would live forever, right? The stamina he possessed was tremendous. He was a great all-around athlete too. He actually had a tryout with the Cleveland Browns. An Ohio State alum. I guess rumor had it he could throw the football like 70 yards in the air. So he's just a tremendous athlete.
And before we get to the final Celtics season, we'll touch upon in this podcast. So we did mention 1976. Mom visits Logan Airport. You pick her up. Bring her to Boston. She hangs around your hometown in Norwood. And then, although the Celtics were going in the tank, the courtship of mom was progressing rather well, correct?
You might say that. Yeah, because well, you and your brother are here, so if it hadn't progressed at least to that extent, we wouldn't be having this interview right now. So and the same and all seems well right now. Still on the marital front after I guess we're well over 40 years. We'll just leave it at that.
So I mean, you graduate and talk kind of a little bit about graduating from Duquesne and sort of that timeline. As you know, you said 76 you were back home from college, but graduating Duquesne and you know that time frame.
Well, yeah, I graduated 76, December of 76, actually. I was a journalism major like you guys were, and did an internship at a local paper down there. And although the journalism never worked out, tough field to break into. But anyway, and mom was a year behind. Eventually the company I worked for uh, moved me down to Connecticut in 1978, and we got married the following year in '79, and settled here in Connecticut, and we've been here ever since. And it really has not been a bad spot to follow the Celtics from. Going back to their games in Hartford, 3 regular season games a year.
Which they started playing in the 70s, not just when Bird came along. They had played a couple games during the 70s in Hartford as well as Providence.
Providence was the primary. Providence was always. One of the issues and one of the reasons the Celtics would go for these neutral site games is because the Bruins always, going back to the old Boston Garden, the Bruins always owned the building. So the Celtics would look for these neutral site games in Providence and Hartford because they could get a better take, and they wanted to kind of stick it to the Bruins if they could, just to lessen one of their gates that the Bruins could profit on. And as as the Bird era became what it was. Obviously, the games at Hartford were sellouts, and the Celtics became an incredibly tough ticket to get, not only in Boston but Providence, and then into Hartford. It was quite an evolution in terms of the Celtics' popularity at the gate. When you look from the mid to late '70s through the '80s into the '90s.
And just a couple more questions. One regarding mom. We talked a lot about we'll talk a lot about championships. That'll kind of be the basis for a lot of these. But was there a grandiose ring ceremony for your proposal or engagement to mom?
No, there really wasn't. We were just driving. She had come up. It was Christmas of '78, and we were driving along the VFW Parkway in Boston, heading in town. And I said, "Well, I guess it's about time to get a ring." And she kind of smiled, and because we had talked a little bit about it, but not in terms of real specifics. But we went into a jeweler where my parents had gotten their engagement ring and wedding rings. Descenza in the jewelers building in downtown Boston, and that's where we got mom's ring and ended up getting our wedding rings too. But the one thing that did happen though, shortly we got. Obviously, in the summer of '79, we got married, but Larry Bird made his debut, a couple of months later at the Boston Garden. We were lucky enough to get tickets for the opening game, which was great. and we were there with my late sister and a friend, and before the game started, they ceremonially sent a dove up to the top of the garden, the old Boston Garden, I guess signifying what a dove does, but plus a bird. It's kind of a soaring bird, and so we saw Larry Bird's first game as a professional, first regular season game. And in fact, in that game, because it began, it was a Friday night game. It was the first game of the season because of the obviously Eastern time, Eastern Standard Time. Chris Ford, shortly into the first quarter, Chris Ford hit a three-pointer, which was the first three-point shot in NBA history, because the 1979 season marked the beginning of the three-point shot in the NBA, which the three-point shot had obviously been introduced in the ABA, but had not carried over at the merger 3 years earlier. But and obviously things were a lot different back then. Very few threes were shot during that inaugural season. But Bird ended up perfecting that, like he perfected most of the rest of his game with that long range shot. So,
and the circumstances, well, with the surrounding the team, even that season prior to Bird's debut, July 1978, you had the ownership swap, which is kind of a footnote in NBA history, but a quirk that does get talked about, where the current Celtic owner, Irv Levin, wanted to move the team to California, and the NBA wasn't going to allow that. So one of the Buffalo Braves owners, John Y. Brown, they swapped franchises. So depending how you look at it, some people joke that the Celtics are kind of the Braves, and then the original Celtics became the San Diego and now Los Angeles Clippers. But you had that kind of clouding the team, at least from a historical perspective. Was that really a relevant thing at the time? That was a big deal, or not really?
it was to an extent. I know Red Auerbach threatened to leave if ownership. If they didn't clear up the ownership situation. And John Y. Brown, I believe he was involved back then with the Kentucky Fried Chicken empire. But he was married to Phyllis George. But anyway, he was not good for the team. And ownership. It's important to have good ownership, and I think Red Auerbach's stance of wanting to have stable ownership really helped keep that team on track to become what it did become. As they had a great season in Bird's rookie year, they won 61 games. I believe at that point it was the greatest improvement from one year to, I think they had won 29 or something the previous year. They won like 30 more games. So at that point, it was the greatest improvement from one season to the next by any NBA franchise, and they weren't quite ready to win a championship that year because there was still some inexperience. But come next year, then things looked like more like the Celtics again in terms of winning championships.
Yeah, and to close, as you said, that season 29-53, last place in the division, second to last in the East. And then they did pick Larry Bird in the first round, the 6th overall pick from Indiana State in the 1978 NBA draft. But if for basketball savants paying attention, the 1978-79 season, Bird was not in Boston. He was finishing out his college career at Indiana State, where they nearly pulled off an undefeated season in a national championship.
Yeah, he was eligible. He was a junior eligible, but that was a sense of loyalty he had that very few people have today, that he actually went back. because he turned. He was born in December 1956, I believe, December 8th, and he turned. His rookie season, December of his rookie season, 2 months into he turned 23. So I mean, he could have been playing the, but so the Celtics, by drafting him and waiting that extra year, they had to sign him before the next draft, and that's what they did, and that was the key thing is they weren't going to let him get back in the draft because it was a smart move taking him number 6 the previous season.
Did you follow his senior season closely and watch the national championship?
Oh game? Yeah, and kind of crazy, because he was kind of a unique player, being the fact that. He wasn't incredibly quick. He was just very smart. He's a smart player, and he could shoot. But I somehow thought, showing my basketball acumen, thinking that maybe they'd be better off with Greg Kelson, who was on Michigan State then. He was Magic Johnson's sidekick, who ended up going to the Pistons and having a decent NBA career, but. Believe me, Kelso was no Larry Bird, so I'm glad that Bird signed with the Celtics and played his entire career with the Celtics.
And it was a disappointing final for Bird, though, obviously.
Yeah, it was. But, he was almost a one-man. They had a guy named Carl Nix, Indiana State, who was a small left-handed point guard. And he ended up getting drafted in the first round only because he was on that team. Only because he's on the team with Larry Bird, because he got drafted in the first round and never really made it, So, he was just, it was disappointing for him. And he showed his emotions at the end of the game. But Michigan State had a far deeper team. That was not only with Magic and Kelsey, they had... Jay Vincent, I believe they had NBA players on that team and they were much deeper than beyond what Indiana State had after Larry Bird.
And that was the spring of '79, as you alluded to. Bird debuted that fall with you and Mom there. Your wedding was August 11th of 1979. In Pittsburgh at Duquesne Chapel, and where was your honeymoon following the ceremony?
Well, the honeymoon, believe it or not, was in West Haven, Connecticut. We went. We rented a U-Haul from as Mom's parents. My wonderful in-laws, gave us some furniture to bring up, and so. I had an apartment in West Haven, but sparsely furnished, and and I told I was kind of getting my feet wet with my new job, and it was at the height of the season in terms of selling, and so we kind of postponed a honeymoon, and we ended up hanging out at Savin Rock in lovely West Haven, Connecticut.
So it was a beachside honeymoon, and even before Bird's debut, there was a game you did attend as newlyweds that fall prior to the Celtics home opener, as you said, with Chris Ford making the first three-pointer in NBA history, that pitted the reigning champion Pittsburgh Steelers against the then sort of upstart or at least contending competitive New England Patriots in Foxborough on a Monday night. That was a close game, but can you talk about that game and the ride home?
Yeah, that was that game, I believe, went into overtime, and the Steelers won. It was an opening. It was a Monday night game. 16-13, and the Patriots were coming into their own, and the Steelers, were Super Bowl champs. We actually had a buddy who was at the wedding, big Steeler fan came, and he was kind of comical in the stands with his Steeler banner, and acting a little maybe a little too partisan for Patriot fans. Being that the game was in Foxborough, but we made it back. Driving back late that Monday night through the streets of Providence and heading down 95, on a route that would become quite familiar for us over the next decade.
And just one last thought, Dad, and then we're gonna put a bow on this. Just kind of sum up, if you can, in words, phrases, adjectives, thoughts, just the 1970 Celtics as a whole. Obviously, the decade, you have the Knicks, the Bucks, Lakers, Celtics, Warriors, Celtics, Trailblazers with Walton in 1977, and then the Bullets and Supersonics with Washington and Seattle playing in back-to-back finals against each other. To round out the decade, you had no back-to-back champion. You only had a couple multiple time champions, and you had a lot of variety where some franchises got their only tastes of the finals or championships. But the Celtics get two, and a merger and an ownership sale and a big draft pick, all in one decade. So kind of sum up the 1970s for the Celtics and the NBA.
Yeah, well, no, for the Celtics, it was an eventful decade. It was good. Of course, nothing compared to the '60s, where I guess if you include the decade of the '60s, you'd figure that, well, hey, they won 9 out of 10 championships with the '60 involved. But to win 2 championships in the '70s in a evolving NBA with the merger and an expansion and other things, it was a good accomplishment. You had your ups and downs and some disappointments, but when you really come right down to it, you couldn't expect any more than the 2 championships. Possibly a third in '75, but they won in '74 and '76. '73, you gotta count it to the Havlicek injury, and but no, it was a good decade, and then the '80s, followed suit, and at least there wasn't winning continued. It wasn't like Russell retired and that was it. The team remained competitive, and in most seasons, if not of, very near championship caliber.
And as Dad said, Larry Bird would debut, sort of kicking off the decade to come with Mom and Dad in the stands, a dove released to the Boston Garden rafters. So we'll see if Larry Bird will follow that dove and take flight, as well as the Celtics take flight in the 1980s, and how soon they could add their own banners to the Boston Garden rafters. Thank you for listening to the third installment of Duck and Rock Sports Presents the Celtic Chronicles, and thank you, listeners, for being part of our flock. Duck and Rock Sports Celtics Chronicles Episode 3 Postscript. Matt McDonough here with Marcy McDonough. Mom, what do you remember about your 1976, your first flight to Boston? Do you remember there being a banner across the roadway, the highway leading from Logan Airport across the water to Boston?
I absolutely do not remember that. I remember flying in over the water thinking it was so beautiful. That's all I remember about it.
I'm talking about Dad's big proposal.
It wasn't so much as a proposal as it was a decision to go get the ring, and that's what we did.
And then any thoughts on your big day, your wedding day, August 11th, 1979?
Well, it was a beautiful ceremony. It poured all day. So that wasn't really the best thing. But they say when it rains on your wedding day, it's good luck. I guess it has been since we're still married.
And leaving Pittsburgh, where did you go for your honeymoon?
West Haven, Connecticut. The beach town of West Haven, Connecticut.
And a couple months later, or maybe actually a month later, the Patriots hosted the reigning champion Steelers on Monday Night Football. You, Dad, and a college friend went to the game. Do you remember any details from that game?
Well, I wore my Steelers jersey, and so did Dad's friend, wore his Steelers jersey, and I didn't even remember who won the game. But I guess, thinking back on it, Dad didn't really talk too much on the way home, so Steelers must have won.
Then a little time after that, you went to Larry Bird's debut at home in the NBA of his rookie season. Was that your first time at the Boston Garden?
Yes.
And do you remember any details of the game? Did you understand at the time the historical significance of seeing Larry Bird's first game?
I had no clue that he was going to end up being absolutely one of my favorite players ever to watch, that he's so good at everything he does on the court. So it was the start of a long run for him and a long run for me as being a fan.
And what details do you remember from that opening night?
They let the bird out into the garden. That was pretty cool.
And so that's at least one common detail that I'm sure everyone who was there that night remembers, and that's where we'll start next episode, Larry Bird's first game, as we already kind of talked about a little bit. And again, thank you to my dad and also, obviously, Mom for the postscript. And once again, thank you to all our listeners for being part of our flock.